up, higher, 20, 19, he says more. You gotta agree on this. And somebody was staying at my house last night. They looked at the bed and they saw one hard copy on one side and one hard copy on the other side. And they said, "What is this, the Bible?" And I said, "No, we actually read this book." Raise your hand if you have read this book. Raise your hand if you thought this was one of the most superbly written, superbly researched books that you have ever read. And now, put your hands together to give a huge, warm thank you to our wonderful speaker.
Very kind, and for all the applause which we probably don't deserve. Is this on?
Yes.
Okay, good. It's a real pleasure to be invited here.
You got to speak into it though.
Okay.
Yeah.
Like this?
Yeah.
This will be a new experience for me. It's a pleasure to be here, and I want to thank Medea and Ray and Coat Pink and all the other sponsors for including us in this important event and giving me an opportunity to wear my pink tie. It is especially gratifying because one of our main goals in writing about the Israel lobby was to break the taboo about this topic and to get more people discussing the lobby's impact on U.S. foreign policy. We were convinced that this special relationship between the United States and Israel was harmful to both countries, and that the lobby played a key role, in fact the key role, in making that happen. We felt if more people understood that, there was a chance that American policy could begin to change in a more positive direction. And the various groups that are represented here today are all part of this long overdue process of rethinking our Middle East policy. The various people in this room probably don't agree on every single issue involving American policy. We all agree, however, that the policies that AIPAC and its allies have been pushing for many years are bankrupt and need to be abandoned. There we go. John and I are going to address two main topics in our presentations this morning. I'm going to explain what the Israel lobby is and why it is so influential, and then I'm going to say a word or two about how things may be changing now. John is going to describe the lobby's influence on U.S. policy towards the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, show how that influence has been bad for the United States, bad for Israel, and of course bad for the Palestinians as well. Now, as you all know, it is much easier to talk about, or it's much harder rather, to talk about the influence of the Israel lobby than it is to talk about the gun lobby, the oil lobby, the farm lobby, big pharma, etc. Now that's partly because some groups in the lobby are very quick to attack anyone who questions the positions they favor or criticizes Israel's actions. But it's also because this is a subject that takes place with a history, centuries of anti-Semitism, lots of conspiracy theories like the protocols, etc. And that history shapes how people think and talk about this issue. So if you talk about the lobby's role in the electoral process, the impact of campaign contributions, its efforts to shape media coverage, some people will think you're talking about some kind of cabal or conspiracy. I want to make it clear at the outset that John and I reject all of those various anti-Semitic conspiracy theories. The Israel lobby is not a cabal or conspiracy, not some kind of treacherous plot to control the United States. It's an interest group. Like lots of other interest groups in the United States, its activities are normal forms of democratic politics. The question is whether those policies are just or wise or in the American interest.
That's right.
I might add that, like many of you, we don't question Israel's legitimacy or existence, but we think the activities of AIPAC and its allies and their influence on U.S. foreign policy, indeed the entire special relationship between the United States and Israel, are topics that reasonable people ought to be able to talk about openly without being smeared or slandered, the same way you would discuss any other group that tries to influence policy or influence American foreign relations. So let me start by talking about the special relationship. The late Yitzhak Rabin once said that American support for Israel was beyond compare in modern history, and he was right. It is still the largest recipient of U.S. economic and military aid. It works out to about $500 per year per Israeli citizen. And that happens even though Israel is now a wealthy country whose per capita income is 27th in the world. Israel gets this aid even when it does things that the United States supposedly opposes, like building settlements. Israel gets constant diplomatic backing from the United States, and we almost always take its side in regional disputes. Israel is rarely, if ever, criticized by American officials, and certainly not by anybody who aspires to high office in the United States. So Barack Obama was silent during the 2009 war in Gaza. His administration did its best to discredit the Goldstone report on war crimes during that war, and it cast its first UN Security Council veto on a resolution criticizing the occupation, even though the resolution was in fact consistent with stated American policy. That's what we mean by a special relationship. Now the question is, why is there a special relationship at all? The answer you will hear across the street at AIPAC is that Israel's a vital strategic interest and a country that shares American values. But those arguments actually can't explain why we give it so much help and with so few strings attached. Israel may have been a strategic asset during the Cold War, but the Cold War is now over. Today, giving Israel unconditional support is one of the main sources of anti-American attitudes throughout the Arab and Islamic world, and one of the main motivations behind anti-American terrorism. It is not the only source of those problems, and the problems we face in the Middle East would not disappear if we had a more normal relationship with Israel. But giving it unconditional backing is not making the United States more popular around the world or making American citizens safer here at home. As the former head of the Mossad, Meir Dogan, told a Knesset committee in 2010, quote, "Israel is gradually turning from an asset to the United States to a burden." He's right, and it's worth noting that the former commander of Central Command, David Petraeus, and his successor, General James Mattis, have both testified to Congress as to how the persistence of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is a major liability for the United States as well. As for the claim that Israel is a democracy that shares our values, yes, it's a democracy. Let me finish. But of course, so are lots of other states around the world, and none gets as much support or with so few strings attached. There are also significant differences between Israeli democracy and American democracy. Israel was explicitly founded as a Jewish state. Non-Jews there are treated as second-class citizens, both de facto and de jure. By contrast, the United States is a liberal democracy where citizens of any race and religion are supposed to have equal rights. We are not a Christian nation that treats Buddhists or Hindus or Jews as second-class citizens. We are not an Anglo-Saxon state that puts Asians or Italians or Greeks in a different category. And even if our performance throughout history is not perfect on that score, our ideals clearly are. Furthermore, Israel's claim to democratic status is contradicted by its imposition of a legal, administrative, and military regime in the occupied territories, its prolonged effort to colonize those lands, and to deny the Palestinians who live there basic human rights. Like all colonial enterprises, this policy requires heavy-handed coercion, sometimes brutal, lethal force. Such behavior, which has been underway for over 4 decades, is clearly at odds with the values the United States claims to believe in, and we are, of course, complicit in that action by providing unconditional aid. It is often argued that the American people are strongly pro-Israel, and that explains the special relationship. Politicians are just doing what the people want. The lobby's really not that important. John is going to address that argument in greater length in his remarks. I will just say that the evidence for this assertion is unconvincing. There are numerous surveys that show Americans like Israel, they want it to do well, but they are not demanding that we support it no matter what it does. So then the question is, what explains this privileged position, this special relationship? The real reason, of course, is the Israel lobby. The lobby is a loose coalition of individuals and groups that actively works to maintain and strengthen that special relationship of unconditional U.S. support. Our focus today is on AIPAC, which is the most visible part of the lobby, but there are lots of other groups that also actively work to keep that relationship intact, like the Anti-Defamation League, the Zionist Organization of America, Christians United for Israel, think tanks like the Washington Institute for Near East Policy, publications like the Weekly Standard. Now this is a broad concept of a lobby, but of course if you think about it, in America most interest groups have lots of different parts to them. The environmental movement isn't just the Sierra Club or Greenpeace. There are also think tanks, research organizations, college professors, journalists who actively work to alter America's policies towards the environment. Just like the pro-Israel movement, and that pro-Israel is in quotes, tries to do as well. The lobby, by the way, doesn't include anyone who happens to have a favorable attitude towards Israel. You have to be actively working to maintain that special relationship. It's not a centralized organization with a single headquarters. The groups that make it up don't agree on every single issue. And just to repeat, it's not a cabal or a conspiracy. It's just an interest group that operates the way most other interest groups do. It's just a lot more powerful than most of them. One final point, as many of you know and are in fact evidence of, the lobby is not synonymous with Jewish Americans. Surveys suggest about a quarter of Jewish Americans don't care very much one way or the other about Israel. Others, including many people here today, don't support AIPAC's positions, and some groups that work on Israel's behalf, such as the Christian Zionists, aren't Jewish at all. The lobby's defined by its political positions, by its political agenda, not by someone's ethnicity or religion. So how does it work? Well, in the United States, small groups with a very focused agenda often can wield disproportionate influence. Because they care a lot about a particular issue, politicians can get their support by giving them what they want, and they won't really lose anybody else's. Again, think of the National Rifle Association or the Farm Lobby. And like other interest groups, the Israel lobby works in two main ways. First, it works to get sympathetic people elected to office or appointed to key positions in the executive branch, and then gives them clear incentives to follow the lobby's views. AIPAC's annual budget is estimated as in excess of $60 million. It is very active on Capitol Hill, helping draft legislation, providing talking points to congressmen, writing letters for them to sign. This is a highly professional organization. It has an energetic grassroots base. It should not be underestimated. Despite its name, AIPAC is not a PAC, it's not a political action committee, and it does not give money directly to candidates. But it does ask all candidates for office to provide information on their views on American Middle East policy, and then it helps steer campaign contributions from individuals and other political action committees to the people who have the right views. Pro-Israel political action committees gave almost $70 million to political campaigners since the early 1990s. And that's just the PAC money. That doesn't count individual contributions. By the way, by contrast, Arab American PACs gave less than $1 million over that same period. So you can see right there why people in Congress tend to pay a little bit more attention to what AIPAC wants.